They can be dismissed from a case if their constitutional violation was not, according to the Supreme Court, clearly established, and that can be really hard to find. Texas is not a great place to bring any of these kinds of civil rights suits. That means that they're going to be internally investigated by the department. Departments across the country have been found to have pretty inadequate systems of internal affairs investigations.
We're pleased to be joined by Joanna Schwartz, an author, professor of law, and leading expert on police misconduct litigation. I want to start before we get in by thanking you for joining us today and taking a moment to speak with us.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, the pleasure's all ours, truly. So I want to start with just say, let's say there's an instance of police misconduct that happens, but maybe it doesn't garner the sort of national attention that could drive activism or legislation, the kind of things you would want to see. What options is a victim then kind of left with to get justice against officers? And then could you kind of briefly lay out the systemic obstacles that might be presented for each?
Often there's an interest in having some consequence for the officer, having some acknowledgement of wrongdoing by the government or by the officer. And there's really three main ways in which someone could try to get that kind of justice. One would be filing a citizen complaint. And the challenges associated with filing a citizen complaint are that that means that they're going to be internally investigated by the department. Departments across the country have been found to have pretty inadequate systems of internal affairs investigations. And so often those kinds of complaints result in no finding of wrongdoing. Another option, and one that often people are focused on, is criminal prosecutions of officers. And although the evidence that we have is that prosecutions happen a bit more often now than they have in the past, they're still very infrequent, and particularly infrequent if you're talking about some sort of harm that didn't result in death. And so getting a criminal prosecution is very challenging to do. Whole separate question about whether you want to be adding people to the penal system as the punishment for that kind of misconduct. But often what you're left with as a third option is filing a lawsuit. And there's a lot of really valuable information that can come out in the course of litigation. People can find out what happened to loved ones, what was the underlying cause of what happened in the case. And at the end of a case, you can end up with some compensation, which is meaningful to people who have lost loved ones or lost, valuable parts of their lives. It can be hard in parts of the country to find a lawyer, certainly outside of the big cities like Los Angeles, where I live, in New York and Chicago, San Francisco. It can be hard to find a lawyer who is willing to take one of these cases and who is knowledgeable about these cases, because they're complicated legally, and that leads to other challenges of bringing these cases. There's the doctrine called qualified immunity that a lot of people have heard about in recent years. That means that even if an officer's violated your constitutional rights, they can be dismissed from a case if their constitutional violation was not, according to the Supreme Court, clearly established, and that can be really hard to find. It's very hard to get justice in the system as it currently stands.
I agree. And there's a couple really good things you said there I want to ask you about. I did first kind of just want to ask, are there any, maybe through your research or just experience kind of dealing with this, writing the book, were there any steps or procedures that one could take that you think maybe raises the chances of success? Or is there anything like that? Or is it kind of a maybe flip of the coin as to your luck?
Well, I mean, it certainly depends on where in the country you're filing your case, which you don't have any control over in most cases, because you live where you live, and whatever it is happened where it happened. But part of my research suggests that it really does matter where you file these cases, and it's because the judges are different, because their interpretation of the law is different, because the juries are different, because in some places there are more lawyers than others. So I think geography really matters. I also think that press and public attention and community advocacy really matters. And I view litigation not as some silver bullet, but as just one tool in a much bigger process. And the cases and instances and places where there has been press attention and public attention, it really makes a difference at every stage of the case. And so I think that's a huge part of the process as well.
So that's interesting. That one more follow-up question I wanted to ask, because you said about location mattering a lot. Is that more geographical, more so like you spoke to like big city, little city, just having like access to the lawyers? Is it more like kind of like politically geographical, like conservative versus liberal in the courts, or kind of what defines why the location matters so much?
I think it's all those things. I think that in big city, and they all sort of they can combine together. So in a larger city, there's going to be more lawyers probably who know about the area of law. There also might be juries that are more sympathetic to plaintiffs' cases. And so, I think in a big city versus a smaller town, there's generally going to the larger city is probably going to be more hospitable to these claims. But then you also can think about parts of the country. So in Texas is not a great place to bring any of these kinds of civil rights suits. But it's easier to bring them in Dallas than it is in El Paso. And it's easier probably to bring them in El Paso than, a much smaller town even.
Mhm.
So I think that size matters and geography matters. And it's sort of on a spectrum.